Veteran journalist Bob Woodward is weighing in on his conversations with President Trump from earlier this year. In a new 60 Minutes interview, Woodward says that the president was warned about the coronavirus as early as January. However, he downplayed and lied about its severity in the months that followed. President Trump has defended that decision, though, saying that he didn't want to cause widespread panic. In an interview with 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley, Woodward explains just why he thinks President Trump is the wrong man for the job.
Pottinger said his contacts in China told him this is going to be like the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic that killed 675,000 people in this country. It was a stunning moment in the Trump presidency, and I think in American history, because he then went on to publicly dismiss the virus, and he knew that this was a pandemic coming.
And this is January 28th.
Yes.
There are growing concerns over how the coronavirus and the president's decision to downplay the pandemic's severity are impacting national security. So former Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson served in the Obama administration from 2013 until President Trump was sworn into office in January of 2017. And he is with us now to talk about all of the stories that are in the news, many of the stories that are in the news. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. And I think we're going to start with those recordings from Woodward, and in particular about the coronavirus. You know, the president's explanation for this, for deliberately downplaying the severity, is that he didn't want to cause widespread panic, that he wanted to project strength to the American people. And we certainly have seen the president sort of bend himself into all sorts of contortions to avoid even using the word negative. You recall when he had tested negative for the coronavirus, he sort of said, well, I tested positive in a negative way. He just didn't want to say I tested negative, even though it was a good thing. I want to get your take on his explanation as to why he downplayed the severity of the virus. What do you think?
I think it's disingenuous, frankly. This president's entire campaign strategy this re-election year is to create panic. When he talks about how election night is going to be a disaster, how if Joe Biden is elected, he's going to bring in Cory Booker to destroy the suburbs. You'll recall 2 years ago during the midterms, he talked about caravans marching toward the southern border from Central America. His very strategy is to create panic and instill fear in the American people. So to say now that the reason he didn't want to be honest with the American people about the dangers of this virus is because he didn't want to create panic is frankly disingenuous.
Mr. Secretary, do you believe, given the information that the President of the United States received back in January 28th, that the coronavirus, COVID-19, had the potential to be one of the greatest national security threats to the United States? Do you believe that President Trump then went out in front of the American people and deliberately misled, deliberately lied about the information that he was given by his national security advisors and lied about that to the American people?
I'd say it this way. I believe that our response in this country to the coronavirus has been tragically disappointing. The nation with the most powerful public health care apparatus has had the poorest public health care response. And that is due largely to a failure of national leadership from the beginning to tell the American people the truth about the dangers that we face. Put aside what he told Bob Woodward in February and March. By mid-April, we knew how to combat this virus. We knew, because of the experience here in the Northeast, in New York, New Jersey, that if people engage in aggressive physical distancing, wear masks, engage in good hygiene, stay at home, don't go to work, we can flatten the curve. But tragically, we've continued to see surges across the country because our national leadership has not been truthful with us about the things we need to do, and has encouraged the American people to let their guard down, get sloppy, go to mass gatherings, and the like. And so we are now, as I speak, approaching 200,000 dead here in this country as a result.
This administration has used the pandemic to, limit access to our borders or shut down borders. It's a point of pride for the president to say that very early on they stopped flights from China. But turning to the southern border now, CBS News reports that 8,000 migrant children have been expelled at the border and denied entry during the pandemic because of a new emergency policy. Also, 1,000 more migrant families and adults unable to seek a refugee status in here. Do you agree with the administration's strategy as it tries to combat both the coronavirus and migrants trying to enter the country?
The administration has invoked a provision in our public health care laws that allows the government to expel people at the border without even an opportunity to make a case for asylum. I'm not in a position to second guess that, but I do know that when you do something that significant and that aggressive to deter people from crossing the border for this long a time, what you're simply doing is encouraging them to try to cross the border in another way. Up until this year, what migrants would do is they cross the border and they would assume that they would be apprehended by our Border Patrol, and then they'd make a case for asylum. Now, with the invocation of this law, we're probably simply just encouraging migrants to avoid capture and get into our country undetected.
Secretary Johnson, let me switch gears and ask you about the recent protests and the ongoing movement against police brutality and racism across the country. As you know, the Department of Homeland Security has defended its decision to send in federal agents to protect federal property and arrest demonstrators. What's your take on this response? What's your take on seeing, for example, the National Guard called out to when there are peaceful protesters who are gathering and peacefully demonstrating, as they did in Washington, D.C., seeing the United States military called out to try and suppress that constitutional right?
Well, let's unpack this a bit. Principal responsibility for public safety in any city, for example, is with the mayor, the governor, police chiefs, and if they need it, at their request, the National Guard under the control of a state's governor. My concern with sending federal civilian law enforcement from DHS, DOJ, and otherwise into a city and telegraphing it in such a high-profile way is that it might actually be making matters worse and be unduly provocative. The core missions of the Department of Homeland Security are the protection of the American people at the borders, aviation security, maritime security, port security, and cybersecurity. And when I was in office, I constantly told our component leaders, our workforce, we need to focus and stick to our core missions. And that's what the Department of Homeland Security should be doing.
You spoke at Liberty University on 9/11. You did it virtually because of the coronavirus. You talked about the partisan divisions in this country. And I'm curious, you also talked about your own personal family history. Liberty University is it's a conservative institution. I wonder what your hope was by addressing the crowd there. What did you ultimately hope the message was that they walked away with?
Well, thanks for asking. In my post-government life, I have made a point of talking to a cross-section of audiences. We're never going to get anywhere in this country with a higher, better understanding and a higher level of agreement if we all just talk to audiences that we know already agree with us. I've wanted to talk to an audience for a long time about the importance of morality, integrity, and character in political leadership. And I was offered that opportunity at Liberty University. Liberty is in Lynchburg, Virginia, where my father's slave ancestors happen to have been born and lived and are buried. And so I accepted the invitation. And I think I found a receptive audience there. Liberty, in many respects, actually reminded me of where I went to college, Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. And I hope I made a good impression, and I wanted to deliver that message, and I think it was well received.
Listen, I'm sure we only have time for a couple more questions. We are sort of on the eve of a national election. During the last national election, the administration that you worked for wrestled with this idea of just how much is Russia and other entities meddling in our election? Just how much do you reveal to the public in light of how contentious the election was?
Right.
What is your biggest concern, and what do you consider, if you could, first, is our upcoming election under threat, and what is your biggest concern?
Yes, our upcoming election is under threat. I look at the threat in three separate categories: the effort to infiltrate political campaigns, the effort to infiltrate our actual election infrastructure, and the disinformation campaign, the information op, so to speak, directed at the American people. And we're hearing reports that the political leadership is trying to suppress reports of this, intelligence about this, and the American people are entitled to know exactly what is going on, what is being directed against them. But my main message here is that none of this should discourage people from voting. Plan your vote. Vote early, figure out how you're going to vote, and make sure that your vote is counted, no matter what.
Secretary Johnson, before we let you go, I mean, Anne-Marie points to Russian meddling in our elections. In any, I guess, normal, it's hard to know what normal is anymore, but in the last 5 or 10 years, you know, a foreign actor meddling in a U.S. election would be where all of our efforts as a government, as a nation, as a people would be focused on. But there are so many other threats to Homeland Security right now, including those fires out west that we're going to talk about, including the rise of white supremacy and anti-Semitism, police brutality in this country. The President of the United States yesterday leading a chant of his supporters to lock up a former United States president. How would you sort of gather all these threats, and where would you focus your attention? I mean, this is a powerful nation, the most powerful nation on earth, but even the most powerful nation on earth cannot conceivably address every single one of these threats that are all happening at once, sort of like a fire hose, can they? Can we, I should say.
Good, excellent question, which is why when you run something as large as the homeland security of this nation, you have to depend upon strong component leadership at places like FEMA, TSA, those in charge of our cybersecurity, and make sure that all of them are focused on those respective threats that you just outlined. No doubt, we're in a situation now, 50 days before the election, when there's much to be concerned about with our democracy, with global warming, with the threat of violent white nationalism, with the demonstrations going on, the continued effort to address Black Lives Matter, address the problems of local police. There's a lot to focus on right now. And that's why it's important to have committed, strong national leadership dedicated to the protection of the American people and their democracy.
Secretary Jeh Johnson, thank you, sir, for spending some time with us this morning. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.